Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We welcome you here to Season 52 of Rolling Thunder Gaming's Talladega Challenge, as this is race number 2 of the season. Coming off an exciting season opener last week, we get ready to now see if drivers will be able to continue their momentum from last week or if they'll be able to combat maybe a poor performance they got in the season opener. I'm Seth Cole alongside of Zach Freeman. And Zach, like we talked about last week, clean slate for the drivers. Now they've basically been able to set themselves a starting point here for the rest of the regular season.
Thank you, Seth. Good evening, race fans. Yes, we are 1 week in. We know we have one driver locked into the playoff grid at the end of the season. Everybody else trying to make sure that they maintain good posture as we work into week number 2. Any bad luck that they had last week could be wiped away, just as well as their woes back in season number 51. However, another bad week this week could put you in a bit of a hole. I don't think you're in quite a hole yet if you had a bad week number 1, Seth, but I think if you have 2 consecutive bad weeks to start out the season, you might be starting to sweat a little. We saw Josh Metallic, who is one of those guys who, we're used to seeing in victory lane here at these super speedways, go winless in season 51. He was able to rebound from that last week, week number 1. He is the driver we mentioned that is locked into the playoff grid at the end of the season. So, Seth, I think we're going to see quite a good race here. I'm not doubting that whatsoever. I think a lot of the guys that set themselves up with good runs last week are going to be coming in here with a lot of confidence. The guys in the back just hoping to get themselves back together. So we'll see how they can all do when the checkered flag flies tonight.
And we'll, in a few moments, take a look at what the point standings are coming into this race. And we're going to see quite a number of names up there that we didn't even see in the playoff system last season that could very well be looking to either win or possibly point their way into the playoffs. But first, let's get our pre-race interview. We're going to talk with a driver that up until Joe DeSpirito did it last season was the only driver in the Tally Challenge to have back-to-back championships. We haven't seen him on track since mid-June of last year. That's the driver, the number 4, Brian Schilling. Hey, Brian, it's Zach and Seth up here in the Flatout Racing Network studios. You got us?
Yeah, what's going on?
Well, man, coming into this race, you're the only driver that's held up that Tally Challenge trophy not once, not twice, but 3 times. But it's been a while since we've seen you on track. We're going to see a little bit of race rust, or are you ready to go out there and put this number 4 in victory lane?
I'm going to shake it down for a little bit. See, starting in the back. Just want to make sure everything's working all right. And hopefully I'll get it up front towards the end.
Hey, Brian, Zach in the booth. Good to talk to you, man. It's been a while. Like you mentioned, you're starting at the back, going to try to work some of the bugs out of it. I heard that Schilling Motors may have gone under, but it's good to see that you're back and ready to go. Who are you looking to work with here tonight?
Hopefully I can get lined up with the 17 at some point, or 24, 712. I've always worked well with those guys.
Well, Brian, we wish you the best of luck here tonight. We look forward to seeing you work your way up there to the front. Been a while since we've seen that number 4 up at front here at Talladega, so looking forward to it. Good luck.
Thank you.
And as stated, we're now going to show you the point standings coming here into this second race of the season. As you mentioned already, Zach, Metallic here at the top of the point standings. More importantly, he's got a playoff spot locked up, but I'm looking at some of these other guys, familiar faces of Joe DeSpirito and Bob Seminara in second and third. But how about some of these guys here like Chris Elliott and currently tied for third place? Jeff Crivello also there in 5th place. You got Jerm Lewis down there in 8th. We saw last season a lot of drivers really get some great runs at the closing end of the year and trying to carry that momentum over here in the beginning of season 52.
Absolutely. And I think the key word that you just touched on there, Seth, is momentum. As you mentioned, we saw a lot of those names put together some really solid performances in the latter stages of season number 51. If you remember, John Godfrey, another one who pulled off the victory in the finale, in the championship race, and he went out there and spoiled everybody. So I think if these guys can keep working at it the way that they have, not only will they find themselves continuing to be in good position in the points heading toward the playoffs, but maybe in contention for a win.
Absolutely. We got some new features here this week, and one thing we're also going to be touching on here in the beginning stages of this race is our keys to the race here at Talladega Superspeedway.
Keys to the race tonight, Seth. So I think number one's going to be survive to pit. Now, we've seen some of these races that have, had yellow flags about the halfway point of the first run or so, and that kind of negates any sort of issues that you might have. But again, that's that whole survival point. You don't want to be one of those teams or one of those cars that's caught up in that first wreck. And not only do you have to worry about surviving that, but if you are hot pitting under green as well, you better be careful on entry, especially in a group of cars. We've seen that play havoc with many competitors throughout the season.
As we were just talking with Brian Schilling, he singled out a number of drivers, the 17 of Chuck McClure, the 24 of Joe DeSpirito, the 712 of Bob Seminara. We know they are fast. If you're fast on the racetrack, people are going to want to work with you. And so we're going to be seeing a lot of drivers that we know are able to lead a group in that middle and outside line in 3-wide formations. They're going to have friends. You're going to want to find those fast cars, especially at the end of the race.
Absolutely, Seth. A third point, something that we always talk about on these super speedways. The big one is lurking. You can have 60 laps of clean green flag racing, but on lap 61, if everything breaks loose, you could find yourself from the front of the pack all the way in the back, or conversely, find yourself in a position where everybody in front of you is wrecked out, and you find yourself at the front of the pack. But you don't want to get caught up in that, because that could end your day early as well.
And while you're keeping an eye on all the racing going on around you and where you're currently positioned, you got to keep an eye on the lap counter as well, because there is always the potentiality that this race could end under caution if we enter into that point of no return. So you're going to see a lot of drivers at the end of the race rushing from the mid-pack to the front to try and get themselves in position, so that way they might be that car leading back to the start-finish line, whether it be the white flag, checkered flag, or maybe the caution flag coming out to end off the finish of the event.
Pretty cool new features that we got here for FRN. Thank you, Seth, and everybody behind the scenes for putting in the work on those little toys, tools, and everything for you to lay your eyes upon at home as you watch these races from Talladega Super Speedway and Rolling Thunder Gaming. Race number 2, Seth, Joe DeSpirito, does it need saying on the pole once again?
2 for 2 here to start out the 52nd season. We saw him on pole in the double digits last season, and obviously I think he's probably trying to beat that for a new personal record. He's going to line up alongside of Bernie Mobbs for the front row. Chuck McClure will be lined up in third with Bob Seminara to the outside of row 2. Row 3 will find Jeremy Jeffries and Grant Wesley. Donnie Garrett, who went airborne last week but still managed to finish up inside of the top 15. He'll be 7th alongside of Jessica Shelton. Tim Knopfsker is doing the driving duties of the 28 this week for Mark Paglia. We'll be filling you in on that situation in mere moments, as he'll be alongside of Bob Dixon in 10th. Row 6 will find Ken Roberts and Jeff Crivello. Row 7, Dante Ricky, who failed to make the start last week, and he'll be alongside of Sonny Tallman, his teammate. Josh Metallic, who went to victory lane last week, he's 15th alongside of Rodney Sullins. Then in row 9, it's going to be David Cannon and Bobby Farrell. Top 20 completed by John Godfrey and Dave Melson. Then it's going to be Wiley Coate in 21st, 22nd, Billy Elliser, Doug Woolley 23rd, 24th will be Chris Elliott, who had a podium finish here last week. Row 13 finds Glenn Harris and Chris Emery, Manny D and Jerm Lewis in 27th and 28th. 29th place is where we are going to find, if I can get it up here, Mike Rogers, Wayne Pribnow in 30th. Richard Martin and Robbie Nice is 31st and 32nd were the last to take time. Hank Middleton will be 33rd, Perry Bond 34th, 35th, Cy Jones, and Brian Schilling, who we just talked to, will start at the rear of the field, 36th on the board.
Another big field tonight here at Talladega, Seth. I think the first 2 weeks here at Rolling Thunder Gaming, we've seen some of the most consistently larger fields than we've seen in quite some time, pulling in quite a number of racers. Quite a bit of interest in this series. It's a lot of fun to watch at home, but it's even more fun to participate in if you are in a position to do so. So, Seth, that pace car going to peel itself down off the racing service onto pit road. Joe DeSpirito for the second time this season, and about, the 15th time over the last 2 seasons, going to bring him down here to the line for the green flag. I think we're in for another really exciting race.
I think we are indeed. Maybe these drivers have gotten the early season jitters out from the season opener. We'll see if it'll be a more relatively calm race here tonight as DeSpirito gets the green flag. Second race of the season is green.
They work themselves down into turn number 1. Joe DeSpirito with the slight advantage on the bottom line. It looks like Chuck McClure is going to follow behind him. Jeremy Jeffries as well as outside pole sitter, the number 90 of Bernie Mobbs. He's fallen about 4 or 5 car lengths back on that outside line. The first 2 cars broken away before side by side through the rest of the field, working their way down into turn number 3.
But it might have been by design there because Bernie Mobbs had Bob Seminara behind him, and then Joe DeSpirito and Chuck McClure, they jumped up to the middle groove off of turn 2, so now they're up there in what we kind of consider the faster lane around the racetrack, that middle line, and looking like they're trying to tow that middle line around Jeremy Jeffries leading the bottom.
Absolutely, but you got to watch out for that bottom line. We know that number 8, that number 28, as well as that 17, those 3 or 4 drivers on the bottom lane in particular work really, really well together. Sonny Talman, he's going to be the 4th car on that inside line. He's going to be following behind the 28 of Tim Nofsker. Looks like the 77 of Donnie Garrett got a little bit of a side-to-side wiggle going on there. I don't think that was internet-induced. It looked like his car may have stepped out on him just a little bit. That's going to break that bottom line momentum just a little bit more as that middle line has a 4-car breakaway into turn 3.
Yeah, you see third on that inside line, that red and white Motorcraft Ford of Tim Nofsker. Now, for those that didn't join us last week, Chuck McClure was in the number 28, which we're used to seeing Mark Paglia behind the wheel, and unfortunately, we ended up having the sad news that Mark Paglia's wife, Mary, was actually diagnosed with a cancerous tumor. Mark and Mary ended up going to the MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston, Texas, and we actually do have some good news on that score. End up finding out the day after last week's Talladega race that tumor was removed, and so now the thoughts and prayers are with the Paglia family for a speedy recovery. It's still going to be a while since we'll see Mark Paglia back in the driving duties of that 28, but definitely some great news coming out of one of the members of the RTG family.
Very glad to hear that, Seth. It'll be good to see Mark back. The most well wishes in the world out to the entire family, and I'm sure Mark's probably watching at home. He knows that he's got a good driver, and that number 088 is which Tim Nofsker usually drives regularly, piloting his number 28 Ford this week. So he'll be rooting him on, and I know Tim won't let him down, that's for sure.
Right now, that inside line is going nowhere. The top 6 make it now 7 on that outside line, appear to have cleared him up to Jessica Shelton. Bob Dixon now trying to clear in that Doritos Dodge. So you got to wonder now with these drivers in this middle line, do they keep the status quo, or at what point are some of these drivers going to think about, there's enough of a breakaway here. Do we make a move possibly on the 24?
Well, that's actually a good question there, Seth, because we are only 4 laps in. We'll be ticking off lap number 5 as they work their way across the line this time. I mean, naturally, as a driver, I think you want to get out there and try to make moves, but at the same time, it's still really, really early in this race, and if you can string the field out a little bit, try to avoid, any big pileups that might happen out there on the racetrack, it might be better to just sit and be a little bit content until the first round of green flag pit stops. But as you mentioned, Jeremy Jeffries going nowhere with the help of Donnie Garrett and Tim Nofsker on that inside line. It looks like the car farther behind Nofsker is going to be that 55 of Talman, who's just not quite, or my apologies, the 39 of Metallic, and they just haven't quite gotten up to those first 3 cars yet. And until that happens, that's a whole lot. It looks like 7, 8, 9, 10 cars even on that middle line, outnumbering the 3 by themselves on that inside line. So it's that momentum thing, Seth, that we talk about quite a bit on these super speedways.
Absolutely. We had some 3 wide at the rear of the field with Wayne Cribnow in the middle. Now up in the mid pack, we find the Krispy Kreme Chevrolet of Glenn Harris. He's stuck in the middle. That's Chris Elliott down to his inside, and Richard Martin up on the top side. Both Elliott and Martin last week with great runs in the season opener, trying to keep that going. Both of them subsequently coming into this race top 10 in points.
Absolutely, and that's a good feeling to come into week number 2 with the top 10 in points. As long as you can get a decent finish out of tonight, the chances are that you can maintain that top 10, and maybe if you do lose any, probably not fall much farther back than 15th or so. So just that momentum thing that we talk about, not only does it happen on the racetrack during the race, but it also consists of, on a week-to-week basis. The better that you run more consistently, the more confidence that it gives you out on the racetrack. So having being that far up in the point standing this early on in the season definitely doesn't hurt anything.
But does it change your racing mentality, though? I mean, I think if we look at Chris Elliott and Richard Martin, these are 2 drivers that for sure they fight their way up to the front. They want to be running up at the front as much as possible. But now that they are where they are in the point standings, do they maybe take a step back and say, all right, now I've got to be a little bit more conservative in these upcoming races, at least to start out the season, to make sure that I'm going to maintain that spot in the standings and do that by surviving until the end of the race?
I don't know if you so much play it more conservative, because we do see Grant Wesley. He's going to make the dive to that inside line, trying to give them a little bit of help. But I think maybe just more so a matter of don't be too aggressive. You know you're in a good spot. You don't want to put yourself into a bad position to make a mistake on the racetrack or, jeopardize running that well, because in a 37 car field, that's a lot of points to potentially give up. So with just one race in the books, it's easier to lose a lot of ground early on than it is to try to make it up progressively throughout the season.
That's a great point. A lot of drivers going to be trying to capitalize on gaining what could possibly be double-digit points in the standings, regardless, depending on where they end up finishing in the second race of the season. The one driver that I'm looking at that probably is looking for a golden opportunity to do just that is Dante Ricky, who, of course, did not make the start last week. Two-time winner last season. And, we thought that more than likely we were going to see him up at the front trying to go for back-to-back wins in the season opener, but got a lot of ground to make up and could be one of those drivers that very easily here tonight, if he were to go to victory lane, we could see him jump from where he is currently, which is 37th in points, maybe up inside of the top 20 in the standings.
Well, and it's even conceivable that he could jump his way into the top 20 in the point standings if he has just a solid top 5 run. Again, with this many cars throughout the field, it doesn't even matter if there's a big wreck or not. That's a lot of positions. It's easy to get yourself in trouble on pit road, even if it's not something on the racetrack, and lose a lot of time, lose a lap, lose 2 laps, and that especially right now, that counts for quite a bit. So I think, like I said, I don't think you go conservative. You just don't go over your head. And as long as you can do that, if you can maintain your level of performance as what you're used to running, I think you're going to be just fine.
Jessica Shelton, Grant Wesley, they've jumped down to the bottom to try and help that inside line, but it still looks like they may be losing ground. That middle line, or outside line, I guess we'll call it at this point, they are still pulling ahead. Dixon has now cleared the top side, and it also looks like Jeff Crivello trying to do the same. The only driver that comes into this race, we already touched on it there, Josh Metallic winning the season opener. And, when we talked to him last week, you could just hear the relief in his voice, because Talladega, Daytona, the super speedway type races, you never know where you're going to finish because there's so much unpredictability involved with this type of racing week after week. And so now you got to wonder what his mentality is coming into a race like this. I think that more than likely it's trying to go out there, get a couple more wins, and of course win that regular season championship, because as we saw in the case of Joe DeSpirito last season, those bonus points are huge.
Absolutely. Throughout the course of the season, those bonus points mean a lot. Joe DeSpirito without a single win throughout the season, but every time that he went into the next playoff round, he had a sizable lead over second place. Now, he lost sizable leads as well, but having that to your advantage, it's a little less that you have to worry about out there on the racetrack. And a prime example of that is, had he not those bonus points and those wins throughout the beginning stages of the playoffs, the next to last race, he had a horrendous race where he only finished a few positions from the very bottom of the standings. Had he not had those bonus points, he wouldn't have been in that championship for and put himself into contention for that championship.
This is a 3-wide battle around the 15th position, and it was nearly the area of our first caution. Richard Martin up on the top side with Wiley Coate. They had a huge run down the back straightaway. Dave Melson tried to go up and block, or at least try and fit into that line, and nearly got hooked in the right rear quarter panel for his trouble. So we avoided near disaster on the back straightaway that last time around.
Yep, and it looks like Richard Martin, he's trying to get into that middle line, but, Dave Melson doesn't. Oh, whoa, Jessica Shelton. Down onto the apron of the racetrack. Miraculously, everybody saves it. It's going to check up the pack just a little bit, but it's only going to bunch them up. Everybody with a lot of really spectacular saves as they work themselves down into turn 3.
Not one of the easiest areas to save a race car, as well as Jeremy Jeffries now gets spun off the nose of Crivello. Hank Middleton spinning as well. At least 6, 7, now make it 10 cars piled up in turn 3. Dave Cannon is barrel rolling. Maybe we could call it a mini big one here on lap 12.
Yeah, that was a lot of cars, Seth. I think that would be fair to call that a big one, especially considering it happened toward the front of the pack. Jeremy Jeffries in that 8 car got quite a bit of pretty substantial damage to the nose and left side of that car. As you mentioned, Dave Cannon took quite a tumble down the banking. I saw the 60 of Perry Bond involved in that as well. I think last year's race winner John Godfrey may have also been involved. A lot of mayhem as they work themselves through the bottom. It's a lot. That's kind of a surprise to me, Seth, considering what they
Oh, we got another
avoided.
spinner here in turn 1. Sorry to cut you off. Mike Rogers has spun around.
That's not good.
No, that was under caution. I don't know if there was contact there or not, but add a couple more drivers to the list that were involved here. I think that Brian Schilling, Bobby Farrell, I think they got some damage, as well as the 9 of Chris Elliott.
I believe Mike Rogers may have shifted into reverse, Seth.
Okay.
I can't confirm that for sure, but I just went and looked at that real quick, and he went from a gear to sideways real quick.
Well, we'll take a look at that one here after we take a look at a couple of angles of that wreck up there in turn 3. And I have to wonder if some of this might have been a byproduct. As you said, everybody got really stacked up after Shelton was able to gather it up on the apron of turn 2. I almost wonder if that's what kind of led to the incident over in turn 3, or if it was something entirely different.
Yeah, I don't think that that's going to be related, Seth. It looked like as they worked themselves down into turn number 3, Jeremy Jeffries had that middle line, and it looked like Jeff Crivello didn't. I don't know, from the looks, I'm not sure if something broke in the front end of the Crivello car, but he just went. It looked like he went right up into the left rear quarter panel of the 8 car.
Definitely pushed up. There's no doubt about that. Another driver that got collected up in that I didn't see originally looked like was the 26 of Billy Elliser. I think there was another car there as well. I think it was the 038 of Dave Melson.
Yeah, there was. It looked like the 8 car kind of spun up the racetrack and then right back down into the oncoming field. Yeah, not sure what happened with the 56, but he just drove right into the left rear wheel of the 8. Makes pretty substantial contact with the rear end. 60 Perry Bond comes down across the track, triggering that other incident. John Godfrey, as we mentioned, Chris Elliott looked like he was sideways. He may have avoided contact despite all that. It looks like Wayne Pribnow is also at the top of the track. Not sure if he took damage, but yeah, I would say easily 7-8 cars involved in this one, Seth. I think that would qualify as a big one.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think Robbie Nice's got a little bit of damage there with the front end of his race car. There you saw Dave Cannon, what sent his car upside down, and more than likely, I think it has actually ended his day. We were closing in potentially on the first round of green flag pit stops, and unfortunately for him, he's not even going to get to make it to lap 15 here in this 66 lapper.
Yeah, that was a big tumble for him. That's a shame to see because we know he's one of those really, really good competitors out here at Talladega, making consecutive race start number 2. I was kind of hoping to see what he could do after being caught for speeding on pit road, I believe it was last week. Took him out of contention last week as well. So we're going to rack them back up, Seth. We're going to have a few cars with damage toward the back of the pack, but other than that, I think we're just really going to put them all in one great big giant pack all over again once we go green again.
Looks like Chuck McClure, according to my telemetry, won the battle off of pit road. So he actually is going to be the one to lead us back to green over DeSpirito, then Seminara, Bernie Mubbs, and Rodney Sullins. Looking here at the 56 of Jeff Crivello on pit road, along with a couple of other drivers as well here on this second lap of pacing. And if we look at some of the other names that are up here inside of the top 10, you've got Grant Wesley in 6th, and how about Ken Roberts in that 055? He's going to be restarting in the 7th position.
Yeah, a lot of guys, they're running pretty good right now. It's early in the race, but it's a good spot. It's a good spot to be in. We're 15 laps into the race, and running right toward the front of the pack. They give you a lot of confidence, and we know that these guys can get it done despite the big names that we mention over and over and over again. We do have these other guys, as you mentioned, that when they get the opportunity, they get right up there and they take it. And it's not really so much a surprise to see them running well. So we'll have to see how that translates toward the end of the race.
So it looks like it might have actually been a dead heat coming off pit road between DeSpirito and Chuck McClure. McClure may have actually crossed the start-finish line, which is just after the pit road exit ahead of DeSpirito, which is why they had him scored as the leader on my telemetry here. But apparently DeSpirito did indeed get to the commitment line first, so he is actually going to be the race leader over Chuck McClure, then Bernie Mobbs, Bob Seminara, and Rodney Sullins. But one thing that I'm looking at right now for drivers that are towards the rear of the field, a lot of drivers took some pretty tough impact to their race cars. I'm looking at guys like Wayne Pribnow as well as John Godfrey. Are these guys going to be up to speed? And if not, it's going to be a long race for them to hope that maybe some other wrecks take place to be able to pick up some spots.
Absolutely. That's a long road to hoe, especially early on in the race in particular. When you have that sort of damage, not only are you off the pace, you're trying as absolutely hard as you can to maintain that draft with the leaders as well. And that can make for just a really long day if you can't stick up there and you can't, don't have any friends out there on the racetrack because you just can't get up to speed. So hopefully it won't be too bad. As we've seen in the past, some of these cars can take some pretty substantial damage. And as long as they can maintain that draft, they're still competitive toward the end. When they really seem to run into trouble is when they lead a pack, though. So we'll see how this all plays out. I'm sure those crews did as much as they could on pit road to get that fixed up for them. And it looks like it's going to be one more lap until we go back green flag racing again. So I think it's time to take a breath. If you were just involved in that wreck, take it easy the first lap or two, see exactly what you got to work with, and then go from there.
Exactly. Agree with you there. Couple of statistics that Joe DeSpirito probably doesn't want me to throw out. We talked about it last week, how we waited last season until the playoffs for the eventual champion to be able to go to victory lane. Well, he was close to being able to open up the season with a trip to victory lane last week, finishing second. The other statistic he doesn't want me to throw out is last week he led the most laps, 34 of the 66 laps, but as mentioned, came up just short of going to victory lane. So far here tonight, of the 16 laps we have completed, he has led 14 of them. So obviously hoping that lightning doesn't strike twice in 2 weeks.
Absolutely, but you know what else he's also hoping? He's also not wanting a repeat of the last 2 seasons where he went the entirety of the regular season without a victory. Getting the monkey off his back for that would be almost as huge for him as it was for Josh Metallic last week, despite having 2 consecutive championships. That's less work that you have to put in over the course of the season, knowing that you're locked in come playoff time.
Absolutely. I'm looking here through our field, and at least 4 former champions jump out at me that are in the field here. Joe DeSpirito being one, Bob Seminara, of course, being another, as well as Brian Schilling, who we talked to pre-race, and Doug Woolley in the 99. I would have to look carefully here of some other ones, but those are 4 at least that I know that have raced a championship trophy here in the Tally Challenge. So we'll see if those are going to be the names we'll see up here at the front in the closing stages. But we just hit the point where these drivers would have had to start thinking about green flag pit stops had we stayed green. Now we're getting ready to go back green flag racing at the start of lap 17.
They work their way through the Triovo slow and deliberately. Joe DeSpirito, no stranger to being the car on the point coming to the start-finish line. They will take the green flag. It looks like on the outside, Chuck McClure has got quite a bit of a push from both the 88 of Grant Wesley and the 712 of Bob Seminara. The 24, on the other hand, on the inside line, got a little bit of a gap between himself and the number 90 of Bernie Mobbs. Right now, the field's spreading out just a little bit, but still side by side coming off turn number 2.
And DeSpirito cannot clear the 17 off of turn 2. There was a huge gap not only from DeSpirito back to Mobbs, but also then back to Sullins and then back to Roberts. Now they've tightened it up on that inside line, but not before McClure might be edged ahead clear on that top side. Nope, DeSpirito back to the bottom, pulls door to door.
Seminara all over the bumper of that 17 car, trying to maintain that momentum and make sure he can get to that 17's bumper coming off turn 4. Doesn't look like it's going to happen, but into and through the trial with the 17 of McClure, still with the advantage over DeSpirito at the line. It is McClure still in the lead. Still 2x2. Josh Metallic poked his nose out about a half a lap ago to make a run on the outside. It was 3 wide for just a moment, but he's settled in right now behind the 43 of Richard Martin running in 10th place.
Chuck McClure was another driver we saw last week get pegged with a speeding penalty, but a timely caution helped him to remain on the lead lap, and he was able to finish the season opener in 10th place. Now out in front with the help of Bob Seminara and Grant Wesley on that top side, and it's been a long time since we've seen Chuck McClure go to victory lane here in the Tally Challenge.
Yep, Chuck McClure, another guy who we expect to see in the winner's circle at some point throughout the season. As you mentioned, Seth hasn't done it yet, but he's having one really, really strong run here tonight. A lot of drafting help behind him in the way of Bob Seminara and Grant Wesley. That middle line now broken away by 4 cars before you get to the first side-by-side into turn 1 between the 24 of Despirito and Josh Metallic. Right now, it looks like those 3 lead cars right now with a lot of speed as they work their way off of turn 2.
Yeah, last season, Chuck McClure was very close to finding victory lane, but finished runner-up 3 times, was unable to pick up a victory. As you mentioned, that top 5 there, and that Josh Metallic, that U.S. Air Force number 39, keep an eye on him, because I think we're going to see him make some pretty aggressive moves in the closing stages of this race, because as we mentioned, he's locked into the playoffs. There's really nothing to lose. You can try and do everything in your power to make sure you're going to find another trip to victory lane, as looks like somebody was coming to pit lane there off the pace. Not sure who that was.
Yeah, I didn't catch that number either, but right now everything pretty tame toward the front of the pack. The first 3 wide that you're going to be finding is going to be about the 2/3 mark of the field. Brian Schilling was on the inside line surrounded by 2 other cars, but that's kind of worked itself back out now as, again, the majority of the field 2 by 2. Right now, that inside line facing the same dilemma that the inside line faced earlier in the race, Seth, where the numbers were on the outside line and only 3 or 4 cars really rely.
Chris Elliott in the wall right there in the 9 machine.
Yeah, he's way off the pace back at the back of the pack. I'm curious to see if he brings it in. I'm guessing that definitely did some damage to the right side of his car, so that's going to knock him off the pace. And to boot, I believe he's also going to lose the draft as he works his way out of the trioval right now.
You know, we wondered about drivers involved in that first caution, whether they'd be up to speed or not. And looks like we could pretty much say everybody that continued on looks like they are still up to speed despite whatever damage they might have gotten. The 711, the 8, the 92, 038, 60, the 4. These are drivers we all know got some bits and pieces of that wreck, and they all are still running here at the very tail end of the pack, but still in the draft lead group.
Absolutely, and I think that they're going to be just fine right now. Everybody's pretty settled in. It doesn't look like anybody's really trying to push anybody too hard. You don't see anybody making any abrupt moves out there on the racetrack. Just as I say that, the 39 of Josh Metallic, he drops down in front of the 24 of Joe Despirito to see if they can make something happen. But as I started to say before Chris got into the wall, that's now only 4 cars with Josh Metallic, Joe Despirito, Bernie Mobbs, and the 99 of Doug Woolley down there. They're just not going to be able to make that speed. And again, without that reliable bump draft from behind you, I have a feeling we're going to see those 4 cars continue to fall back unless somebody in the first top 6 or 7 drops down there and tries to give them a little love from there.
Yeah, Metallic, last time we saw him was in 5th. Last time by scored in 8th. So he is going the wrong way along with the 24 of Despirito and the 90 of Bernie Mobbs. It's Wiley Coate trying to swing around the outside for what I believe would be the 8th position on Josh Metallic. Hank Middleton in the 2 right there with him. Now, we went back green on lap 17, so if you're keeping an eye on when these drivers would have to start thinking about fuel again, we're looking somewhere around laps 33 to 35. We're yet here to have our first round of green flag pit stops.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if we make it this run. We almost went under caution there. I'm not sure if you caught it or not. Just as you mentioned Hank Middleton's name before, he made a dive move to the inside going into the trioval. I think it had to check that middle lane, or that bottom lane rather, up just a little bit, and as they've continued to lose momentum. However, Middleton now making the most progress on that bottom line that any car has so far as he works his way to the inside of the number 6 car of Wiley Coate.
Yeah, not only made that aggressive move on the front straightaways, now looks like Wiley Coate's going to tuck down in front of the 2, but he's having some difficulty with that paint grip there in the trioval. But he and Middleton actually made some contact door-to-door off of turn 2 the last time around. So we've had a couple of near misses of possibly having our second caution of the day, and now we're starting to maybe see an inside line form. Donnie Garrett has now jumped down to the bottom. He's side by side in a battle with Bob Dixon for 5th place, but again, It's only 4 cars down there. Drivers we saw down there before, like Despirito and Mobs, they've jumped up to the high side.
Yeah, there's just not enough help. I appreciate what those guys are trying to do down there because they're trying to make moves. They don't want to just ride around forever. But without the help, they just can't do it right now. Tim Nosker is the 5th car on that inside line. He's about 3 car lengths off the back of Josh Metallic's number 39. Now, if they can get hooked up, they might be able to make a little bit of progress from there. But as it stands right now, Wiley is all over the back bumper, that 77 of Garrett. But the number 2 of Middleton not making it up to his bumper, so they're just not making time right now. It looks like that number 77 is going to be side by side with the 24 of Despirito and the Rodney Solids machine, and Donnie Garrett got real close off of turn number 2 that time by.
Yeah, trying to move up and stifle the run that outside line gets on the straightaway here, especially on the straight back stretch rather than the somewhat curved front stretch. Now Jessica Shelton's going to jump down there to the bottom, but it's going to take her a while to pick up that group behind. She's going to lose a couple of spots in the process.
Yeah, and that's going to check up that bottom line as well. The intention there was good, but the closing rate that those cars behind her are going to have right now is just going to be wholly detrimental. As you see, again, that bottom line is getting longer and longer progressively, but as it stands right now with that lack of momentum, they're going to have to get a big bump draft working here down the back straightaway for Shelton to make any progress on that inside line.
And keep an eye back there of that 39 of Josh Metallic. I think that's Roberts behind him in the 055, Manny D. Side Jones. That's a pretty good group right there. If they get a run to the back of Bernie Mobbs, we could see a 3rd line forming. Metallic with that run. Let's see if he does jump up to the 3rd lane, and indeed he will.
He's going to do it, but is anybody going to go with him? No. That's not a good feeling, as he's now going to lose all the drafting help and all the progress that he made.
I'll tell you what's not a good feeling. Yeah, a lap car in the middle of the tri-oval.
Man, I think he could have gone a little bit lower, but it's going to continue getting... We got one blowing up in turn 1.
Yeah, somebody just blew up at the tail end of the pack.
Jerm Lewis.
The 616 now, is he going to get it off the racing surface and not bring out a yellow? No, he will not. Looks like the caution is going to come out for the 2nd time here tonight.
Yeah, and that thing just grenaded on him as he crossed the start-finish line, went up in a puff of smoke. Hate to see it for Jerm Lewis, one of those drivers that we were talking about just a few moments ago who were having some really, really good runs out here today. So that's going to be stifled tonight, as that's going to end his night prematurely.
Talked about drivers that here tonight after a poor performance in the season opener could gain a lot of spots in the standings with a good run here tonight. Well, on the flip side, Jerm Lewis came into this race 8th in the point standings, and obviously he's going to have to finish this race in the garage area, and he will undoubtedly lose a handful of spots heading into next week's race.
Yeah, I have a feeling, unfortunately, he's probably going to lose more than just a handful, as, I would say having that 8th position in the points was good, but with 36 other cars out here on the track, one of which is already retired, being the 003 of Dave Cannon, that's going to be a loss of about 30 some odd points. That one's going to hurt.
And I think that we can attribute this to what we call in the NR sim a random blow up, because we know for certain that these drivers, with the setup that they're given, they're not going to run hot. They're not going to have water temperature spike and blow the engine that way. And Jerm Lewis was not involved and got any damage from the first wreck. So I think that this is just attributed to, unfortunately, a random blow up for the 616.
Yeah, unfortunately. Hate to see that for Jerm, as it would have been great to see him up there at the end of the race competing for that victory. But unfortunately, going to have to bring it home early. Now, this takes that whole pit strategy thing, shakes it up just a little more. It seems like, Seth, every time we think we figured out what they're going to do for pit strategy, a random event happens out on the racetrack, and it throws it all completely off on us again.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no doubt about that. I mean, we were, about, I think 2 laps away with the first caution of seeing drivers make their first round of green flag pit stops, and here we're about 5 laps away from when we were expecting to see them come down pit road. So in a way, it's kind of cutting these drivers a break. They don't have to worry about green flag pit stops, maneuvering with a big pack to try and make their way onto pit road, while on pit road, make their way off of pit road, and they don't run the risk of getting a speeding penalty, which we saw a lot of drivers have to deal with in last week's race.
Absolutely, and it could very well set them up to, make it the rest of the way with only 2 more pit stops from here, assuming nothing else happens. So we see the race off pit road. The 88 car making a lot of time. Bob Seminara right off behind him. Joe DeSpirito, with that first pit stall, we're used to seeing him get off that pit lane really, really quick. Didn't do it. He's actually going to be mired in about the 6th or 7th position off pit road. So that's going to swap up our order just a little bit as well.
Well, I think we saw there different drivers going with different strategies. I believe that Chuck McClure, Joe DeSpirito, and others, they went with a 4-tire pit stop strategy. Grant Wesley, Bob Seminara, and others that we saw come off pit road, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, I think they went with just the right sides only. So some strategy being played out here, which is kind of interesting because I don't necessarily think you could have gotten that tank completely full of fuel with just taking on the 2 tires, since we were so close to the fuel window of when these drivers were going to have to come down pit road.
Absolutely. But as we've seen before in the past, again, as we mentioned right before as well, we're going to try to figure out this pit strategy and how they do it from here. And it's probably not even going to matter. And if it would, we might have somebody, stretch it across the finish line under yellow flag on empty and still win the race. So we won't make too many assumptions too much at this point of the race. Next time by, we'll click off lap number 30. There will be 37 laps remaining in the race. So it'll be exciting to see what these guys do. Again, I don't know, Seth. I think 37 laps, 1 stop.
I find it very ironic and very apropos that you bring up crawling across the start-finish line on fumes, because if you look at the guy that's leading this race, it was 1 season ago, 2nd race of the season. Grant Wesley on fumes was able to clutch and save enough fuel to be able to get to the start-finish line for what was his first of 2 wins that season.
Yeah, and that's such a rare occurrence. I would highly doubt that we'd see something like that again this season. But if we did, hey, I guess sometimes lightning really does strike twice. So that would be kind of cool to see. It looks like this time by the caution flag light's still going to be on. So we're going to have at least 1 more lap of yellow before we line them back up. Cy Jones right now at the moment at the front of the pack. Grant Wesley right behind him. I believe Cy Jones may be a wave around car at the moment. No, I was wrong. He is in the lead. So
Yeah,
Cy Jones, Cy's going to get his laps led here. It's good to see him up front. And we have seen Cy run well here in the past as well, as he had a top 3 finish just last season, if I remember correctly, Seth.
Yes, he did. He did have a podium finish. As a matter of fact, I believe he had 2 top 10 finishes last season, including that 5 that you just talked about. He stayed out along with a couple of other drivers, Robbie Nices and Wade Pribnow. Nices and Pribnow pitted the last lap. I think we'll probably see Cy Jones come down pit road this time. We should be getting the 1 to green signal. I believe the 2 drivers that are going to be the recipient of the lucky dogs here under this caution would be Mike Rogers. He'll get 1 of his 2 laps back, and Sonny Tolman will also get a lap back. Something happened with that 55. I don't know if he had like an extended stay on pit road or might have actually been battling some internet connections. I know that he's been having issues with that in the past couple of weeks, but he actually fell 7 laps down during the first green flag run.
Yeah, I would guess that probably might have something to do with his internet connection. That's a shame, as we've seen him right up there toward the front of the pack. He's been running amongst the leaders. He's just being that far back. There's not a whole lot that he can do at this juncture unless he gets a whole lot of yellow flags, which I wouldn't say is out of the realm of possibility, but the way they've been running tonight, it's been pretty clean and green most of the time, with the exception of the one incident that we had in turns 3 and 4 involving Jeremy Jeffries and several other cars. So we'll have to see if he can just kind of stick there for the time being and try to make some time up progressively as they work their way to the closing laps. They're coming down to the line this time, Seth. I believe the flagman is going to give them the 1 to go to green this time by.
I believe he will. We should be getting ready to go back green on lap 32, as the lights are indeed out atop the pace car, so they'll get themselves racked up here. Mike Rogers will go around getting 1 of his laps back. 36 drivers started this race. 34 are still out there on the racetrack. 32 of them currently scored on the lead lap. Grant Wesley going to be the leader as we go back racing. I believe he is the 5th different driver we've had out in front here tonight. Bob Seminara lines up to his outside in 2nd. Richard Martin will be 3rd. Jessica Shelton 4th, with Donnie Garrett in 5th. Joe DeSpirito will then line up in 6th with Bob Dixon, Rodney Sullins, Chuck McClure, and Hank Middleton, the top 10. A couple of drivers that, we were talking about at the top of the program, drivers that had good momentum last season, trying to carry it over here into this season, didn't have the opportunity to be in the playoffs. I'm looking at those guys back there in row 4, Bob Dixon and Rodney Sullins. They've been in the top 10 all night long so far.
Absolutely. And we've seen Bob Dixon take that Doritos machine and give it really, really strong, consistent runs. As you mentioned, Rodney Sullins, another one that we've been seeing getting progressively more and more consistently. And I would argue, Seth, it's not just here at the Tally Challenge and the other races that I've been observing them running in as well, like on the Monday night in the Barebone Series. These guys have really started to step up their game quite a bit. It went from a time where you'd see these guys out on the track to, now we're talking about them every week in every race. So a little more time and effort. I think the more track time and seat time that they get here, the better opportunity they have to get to victory lane. But this is a good starting spot, running up front with these leaders and making it known you're trying to make a statement out there. Hey guys, I'm here to win too.
Well, on the last 2 restarts we've had here, Zach, it's been a lot of drivers that have worked together and tried to kind of orchestrate all getting lined up. Now things are somewhat different. We've got Wesley up here with Martin behind him, Seminara with Shelton behind him. So this is going to be an interesting one to see how these drivers all decide to get lined up here, as we'll see if we can maybe run a long enough green flag run to get to green flag pit stops, as green flag back in the air, lap 32 on the board.
It looks like Seminara in that middle line is going to have the advantage down into turn number 1. However, neither of those cars in that front row had the cars behind them on their back bumpers. So they're kind of just off to the races. It's a drag race as they work their way out of turn 2. Wesley is going to slide up in front of the 712 Seminara, take that preferred middle line away. And again, that bottom line, there's just nothing there. So that middle line's going to check out down into turn 3.
Yeah, Richard Martin was able to help push Grant to the point, but Grant kind of had to save himself, stop that run the outside line. Looked like he's trying to get down there low enough to give a little bit of a tow to that Domino's Dodge, but he's just not able to do it, having to leave Richard Martin out to dry, as now looks like back to 4th place might be clear on that top side. Now Rodney Sullins and Richard Martin, they'll battle for 5th.
Oh, Martin with just a little bit of side warp there. It looked like him and Sullins might have gotten together just a little bit, but I'm not sure if that was actual contact or warp on behalf of the Ford. Oh, now another car. Wiley Coate is warping down the track. He actually warped through the 17 of Chuck McClure. Amazing that didn't bring out a yellow flag and cause an incident, but Wiley now staying up at the top side of the track, kind of falling back a little bit. Oh, now he's blinking again, so he's going to have to go to the tail end of the pack.
Dropping to that 3rd line and going to drop towards the rear. Hopefully that'll settle out, as Wiley Coate has spent most of this race up inside of the top 15 and now is outside of the top 20 with those internet problems. That really checked everybody up as well at the front of the field. They've gotten themselves single file all the way back to around the 12th, now make it 14th position.
And that's really good heads-up driving on behalf of all the drivers out there on the racetrack, recognizing that was happening around or in front of them and making sure to give each other enough room so that wouldn't cause incident. Good job on behalf of the drivers, as well as a good show of sportsmanship on the side of the 6 of Wiley Coate. You hate to see it for him, but if that stabilizes back out, we'll see him back up toward the front. Mentioning the front, we've got about a 6-car breakaway before you get to the number 2 car of Hank Middleton running in 7th. He is now catching up to the back end of Donnie Garrett, and it looks like these guys are going to have some momentum as they work their way through the trial. But you see the 77 look high. They're going to have help. Those leaders in front of them are going to stay in that lower middle line. We'll see if they share this middle line going into turn 1.
Looks like it's going to be Garrett, Middleton, Martin, and McClure up on that top side. Now Bob Dixon thought about going up there, then tucks back down to the bottom. So right now, 4 drivers committed to that extreme outside line, and Garrett's been able to get up to the right rear quarter panel of Joe DeSpirito in what's now a battle for the 4th position.
Absolutely. That's going to be our first side-by-side on the racetrack. Rodney Sullins, the 5th car on the inside, we should call it, even though it's technically the inner middle, because, we had Doug Woolley almost got out of shape and spun up the racetrack back there. A little bit of contact. Not sure what happened. Sorry to break away from what was happening at the front, but there was almost a wreck back there. Again, it looks like that outer middle line has fallen off just a little bit. They now only have 3 cars out there, so Grant Wesley still not with a whole lot to worry about aside from the 712 behind him at the moment.
Something I'm noticing a lot more of here at the beginning of the season, and we saw a little bit of it towards the tail end of last season as well. Drivers on that inside line, when they are at a deficit as far as numbers and as far as speed and track position, they will move up the track and almost door bang the car to their outside to try and stifle momentum. We saw it happen just a couple of laps ago with Richard Martin in the 43, and it seems like that is a ploy a lot more drivers are adapting to try and make that inside line work.
I mean, it's doable. It does what you want it to accomplish, but there's also a huge risk involved in that, because even just the slightest touch, especially if it's in the trioval or in those corners, is going to cause a major wreck. So these guys showing a lot of patience, and it takes a lot of discipline as well on behalf of all drivers involved to be able to pull off those moves without seeing mass mayhem out on the racetrack.
Well, we're seeing another thing that we saw towards the tail end of last season, both lanes sharing that middle groove. There's less than half a car length between those drivers when they are side by side going into these corners, and I've seen a couple of these guys with a little bit of side to side every now and then. There's no room for error if that connection problem kicks in.
Absolutely, and that just goes to the discipline that I was just talking about that these drivers have. It might look like they're making it look easy as they do this, but that is not at all easy. As you also know, Seth, having run these super speedway races, the tighter that you're running and the closer that you are together, the more you kind of tense up. It's not an easy feeling, because you know at any moment, if you do anything wrong or the driver beside you does anything wrong, it's all over with.
You are constantly fighting that race car. There is no doubt about that. A lot of times when you think the car is going to turn left going into turn 3, it wants to go straight up the racetrack, and then the next lap, it wants to do the exact opposite. So you're never really certain what the car underneath you is going to do, and all the time, you're racing side by side, sometimes 3 wide with other drivers, as there was contact there. That was Nofsker in the 28 making some contact with the left front of Rodney Sullins.
And that Rodney Sullins machine, he's trying so hard to stay with that lead draft right now, as every time he goes to the bottom, he gets hung out, he goes back to the top, and he gets hung out again. So he's trying everything that he can to try to make some progress up out on the racetrack. But right now it looks like Chuck McClure is going to try that upper middle line with help from the 28 of Nofsker behind him. Rodney Sullins, if he can climb back up to them, might be able to offer them a little bit of drafting help, but it's about a 7 or 8 car breakaway on the inside line before you get to that first side-by-side with a familiar number 8 who was involved in an incident earlier in the race. He's found himself back up in the 8th position, battling Chuck McClure off of turn 4.
Yeah, Jeremy Jeffries, who found himself spun off the nose of Jeff Crivello back in the beginning stages of this race, triggering what was the first caution of the day. Great comeback for him, now up inside of the top 10, and very interesting, this tandem up on the top side, because you have Tim Nofsker doing the driving duties for Mark Paglia this week. He's pushing the driver that did the driving duties of the 28 in the season opener, and they've got some numbers up there with them. Sullins is up there. Looks like also Ken Roberts is up there, but they did have Metallic for a brief moment. He's now dived down to the bottom, so the numbers fading again for that second line.
Yeah, and again, it's an 8-car breakaway on that inside line. They're trying so hard. Chuck McClure and Tim Nofsker are doing a really good job staying about where they started. They're not falling backwards, but the problem is they're not making progress either. So they're just kind of stuck in that line until somebody decides to move up in front of them, or unless those guys in front of them decide to move down to that extreme bottom. But they're just making no time up, as Hank Middleton is now alongside the 17 as they head off into turn 1.
I'm starting to see a trend where I start to speculate when these drivers are going to start coming down pit road for green flag pit stops. That's when something happens, but I got to say it anyway. It looks like the target lap for these drivers now, when they would have to come to pit road, would be somewhere around laps 48 to 50, as problems there was at the 0.55 down below the yellow line in the back straightaway.
I'm trying to look back there right now, but not only did he drop low, he decelerated very, very fast as well.
He's actually retired out.
He is done. Not exactly sure what happened, if there was some sort of an issue. but he is going to be done. So as we look back toward the front of the pack, it's still Grant Wesley with a commanding lead. A lot of help from behind in the form of the 712 of Bob Seminara, the 94 Jess Shelton, the 24 of Joe DeSpirito. Go figure, that's our top 4 finishers in the playoffs last season, and we commented on this last week as well.
Yep.
Those 4, again, way back up at the front of the pack heading into turn 3.
Man, it's kind of as if we've gone back in time to the season finale here again of season 51. Those 4 all nose to tail, and that's what they were when they came to the checkered flag last season, all finishing nose to tail from 6th back to 9th place. But I'm not sure about that 055 of Ken Roberts, what the issue was for him, but he was running 17th at the time. It looks like he has officially parked it for the race. If it was some kind of a technical problem, fortunate that it happened on the back straightaway rather than going into a corner, because it's so much easier to pull the thing down to the inside when you're going straight than to go down from the high banking of the corners down to that very flat and slick apron.
Absolutely, and he abruptly cut it down to the apron. So again, not sure if he had a motor let go, so he was trying to get that thing woed up and off the track before it brought off a yellow, or if there was another technical incident at his end at home. Hopefully everything is okay. Right now, it looks like we've still got the top 7 cars single file in that middle line. The 17 of McClure is still trying desperately to get by that 8 car of Jeremy Jeffries. Not a whole lot going on there, but these guys are going to have to start figuring something out, as guys are going to have to start working their way toward the bottom, as you mentioned, in anticipation of green flag stops coming up quickly, Seth.
Yeah, they keep gaining numbers to give them a little bit of hope. They keep their spot. Right now, the battle going on here between the 8 and the 17 for what is the 8th position. They've now gotten recruited Richard Martin up on that top side. They did have Josh Metallic, but now he's faded back to the inside line, which almost makes me think now that 39 is positioning himself for green flag pit stops.
I think you're absolutely right, Seth. I think that's exactly what he's doing at this point. He realizes there's not a whole lot of ground to be made up on the track right now, so might as well get yourself down to that low line and get ready for pit stops. That way you're not having to fight your way down to the bottom of the track to get onto pit road. That top line now starting to fall apart. Tim Nofsker's number 28 has worked his way toward the inside.
Oh, we got a car in the wall, and we got a wreck. Going into turn 1, Richard Martin and Rodney Sullins. It looks like also Bobby Farrell is involved. Several others flying into this. Manny D is in it. Doug Woolley, Dave Melson, Robbie Nices, Chris Emery, Glenn Harris, Cy Jones, Mike Rogers. The list just goes on and on.
I've got a minimum of 13 cars right now sitting on the racetrack as a result of that incident. I saw 2 cars in particular, not sure who exactly they were, at speed that got high, flipped up into the fence and back down. It's kind of reminiscent of Ricky Craven's wreck at Talladega back in 95 or 96, as he just flipped up into the fence, bounced down back across the track into oncoming traffic, and that was right about the 1/3 mark of the field. So there was a lot of cars that had to work their way through that incident, and green flag pit stops now completely out the window.
Yes, they are, and could very well, I'd have to look quickly here, but this might be a caution coming out where these drivers coming to pit road might be able to make it the rest of the way on just one more pit stop. But I'm not certain who that second car was, to your point, that went up in the air. I know at least one of them was the 92 of Bobby Farrell, who unfortunately as well came back to rest on his roof, was not able to drive away from the incident, so he's going to lose a couple of laps having to call a tow to pit road.
Yep. Him looked like the 38 of Sullins may have also taken quite a tumble on the racetrack, but that looked like the 28 of Nofsker, as I had just finished saying, worked his way down to that inside line. Sullins tried to follow him into a hole that was not there. As a matter of fact, it was occupied by the 56 of Jeff Crivello. Those two look like they may have touched side by side just a little bit, and Sullins came up across the nose of Richard Martin. Nothing Martin could do in that scenario, and just sparked off a big mayhem here right just past the start-finish line.
Yeah, the contact was Sullins, Crivello, and also the 222 of Chris Emery, who was actually the car we saw shoot down to the right side of the screen, down to the infield, and then he came back up the track into turn 1 and collected up a number of more drivers.
Absolutely. So, believe it or not, about 4 cars all at once simultaneously started that crash. It looks like Dave Melson spun up across the track. The 84 of Dante Ricky just narrowly missing that wreck, going through on the bottom. I believe the Emery 222 spun across his nose. I do not believe any contact was made as Emery spun back up the racetrack, but a lot of cars taking a lot of damage, and undoubtedly that's going to take more than a few out of contention here tonight.
Well, Dante Ricky, who unfortunately did not take part in last week's season opener, needed a good run here tonight. We're going to go on board with him as he could have very well been en route to back-to-back poor performances here to start out the season, on board with the Subway Toyota, and let's see how he gets through this incident. Another car that actually went up in the air there in the catch fence, Zach, was the 43 of Richard Martin. And a lot of times when drivers go up there into the catch fence, it doesn't matter how hard of an impact it was. More than likely, your race is going to be over at that point.
Absolutely. You think that that catch fence would be a little bit more, a little bit more convincing. Yeah, okay. A little bit more forgiving than that concrete wall is, but that is just not the case. You touch any part of your car to that catch fence, and that's a night ender in itself right there. There's a lot of times when you'll find if you get into a catch fence or such or anything like that, it can sometimes do immediate motor damage, immediate transmission damage, completely tear the sheet metal up on your race cars. So even on moderate damage, that's something I think that anybody that touched that catch fence is going to have to be really concerned about right now.
And I have just heard that everybody, with the timing of this caution, they are all good to make it on fuel. Now, that's a good news for the drivers and the fact that they aren't going to have to worry about coming down pit road again. The bad news is, since everyone's able to make it on fuel now, pit strategy is out the window. They don't have that in the back of their mind. Now everybody's just going to be racing for that checkered flag, and that's when we're probably going to see the aggressiveness kick up another notch.
Absolutely. There is no more waiting through the next round of green flag pit stops. Your intensity level needs to ratchet up now. There are 19 laps remaining right now. The lights are still on, so it will probably be 17 laps to go when they go back to green flag pit stop. It's go time. If you're in the middle of the pack and your car is not damaged, you need to start working your way forward. And anybody that's sitting in the middle of the pack right now does not want to see what we've seen the last 2 runs, with that leader getting a really good run and everybody following suit and not getting very racy around him, because you're going to need all the help that you can get. That's touches on 2 of those points that you mentioned in tonight's pre-race, Seth. Find fast friends and the end of the race rush. We've already gotten through the survive to pits. Pits are all done. We've gotten through all the, well, I shouldn't say we've gotten through all the big ones, because we will have 17 laps still to go. But I think those last 3 points going to come into play in a big way here with 17 or it's 18 or 19 laps to go now.
You're very optimistic to think we're not going to see another big one here in the closing stages. But update on a couple of other drivers here. Looks like indeed Richard Martin has taken his car back behind to the wall, to the garage area. Bobby Farrell, I think he's gotten his damage repaired, but he is 2 laps down. Mike Rogers actually going to get the free pass here. He was the only driver eligible for getting the lucky dog here under this caution, as it looks like Sonny Tallman actually might have fallen out and never returned back. He's 25 laps down and is not on the track as we speak. So it looks like officially right now, 3 drivers are out of the race, out of 4th if we include the 55 of Sonny Tallman. Actually, I believe also Ken Roberts is officially out of the race. So 5 drivers out. And if we're updating about some other drivers here, well, there is a bonus point on the line for the driver that leads the most laps. Prior to that caution, Grant Wesley had tied Joe DeSpirito for most laps led at 15, but that last time around, Joe DeSpirito was the tiebreaker. He now has 16 laps led and about to lead his 17th, so that very valuable bonus point on the line here as well between the 24 and the 88.
Yeah, that's going to come into play here in the closing laps as well. We know the 24 and the 88 are going to be starting side by side, and we know that these have been the 2 fastest cars on the racetrack, not just because those are the 2 that have led the most, but those are quite obviously the two very fastest on the racetrack. When either one of those guys has gotten out front tonight, nobody's really been able to make any runs at them whatsoever. That middle line being entirely dominant, as we are really used to seeing at this point. So we'll have to see if somebody can make a run up on the very top, or if they can finally find the numbers down low to make that work. But it's definitely going to be interesting to see in the closing laps.
Now, I was told by one driver they're good to make it on fuel. I was told by another driver that they are very, very close, noticing some of these drivers clutching under pacing, so they might be able to save enough for that possible one lap that they are lacking. But yeah, you talk about that front row. If we go back to last season, these are two drivers that went to victory lane 3 times apiece. Despirito, all of his wins during the playoffs, winning the first 3 playoff races. Grant Wesley, 2 of his wins during the regular season, 1 of his wins during the playoffs, which actually locked him into the championship in the season finale. So these guys know how to go to victory lane, but I think right now in this restart, it's all going to come down to how dedicated the drivers behind them are going to be to try and help push them to the front.
Absolutely, and that's going to be really interesting to see. Does Jess Shelton try to give that love to Joe Despirito, and does Bob Seminara try to give that love to Grant Wesley and, get by his teammate? So kind of interesting to see how this is going to play out, but also don't take for granted, behind that front row, we have guys that are really, really hungry to win, and girls. One girl in particular, Jess Shelton, she will be restarting in 3rd. She is still looking for that first super speedway win here. She has put herself in contention, but just not quite gotten the job done here. Behind her is the 77 of Donnie Garrett, another guy who we know who can get the job done. The 143, Bob Dixon, he can get the job done. So we'll have to see, will they try to team up against the 24 and 88, or the 24 and 88 going to run away with it with 17 laps to go here at the line?
And that blue number 8 of Jeremy Jeffries. He was a winner last season, but not high enough in the points for a playoff spot. If he won tonight, he would be in the playoffs for season 52. As green flag back in the air, officially going to be 17 laps to go at Talladega.
Jess Shelton jumps up that high line as Bob Seminara did not fire the way he would have liked to. He's going to fall back right now. The number 90 of Bernie Mobbs behind him. Oh no! Shelton! Big wreck.
Donnie Garrett with a connection problem into the 94, and several drivers swept up on the back straightaway, including last week's winner.
You saw the 77 of Garrett warp right up into the left side of Jess Shelton, sending Shelton hard up into the wall and back down across the track. You were right, Seth. That wasn't our last big one.
Doug Woolley's got damage. 60 of Perry Bonds got damage. We saw Hank Middleton and Josh Metallic back there just leaving the scene of the accident. A lot of drivers took some hard hits into the inside retaining wall there as drivers scattering were turned off each other's noses. There is Shelton in the 94. A lot of damage to the front end of her Pepsi Billion Chevrolet as she went straight up into the outside wall. And it's hard to tell for some of these other drivers back here like Dave Melson and others if they were involved or not, or if they're still wearing the battle scars from earlier incidents. The replay will tell us if they were involved or not.
Yeah, and that accident couldn't have possibly happened at much worse spot. That was right in the middle of turn number 2, not even in the exit of turn 2. So as Shelton's coming down across the track, all these drivers have is up the banking or down into the grass to try to make that breakaway and get away from that. So by the time the crash had progressed itself onto the back straightaway, it was right at the exit of turn number 2. A lot of cars, it's hard to woe these cars down going in a straight line on a flat surface. Now you throw turning and braking at the same time on a super speedway, that throws off the weight distribution of the car. And as we saw, a lot of cars, as you mentioned, really, really, really hard impact to that inside wall.
John Godfrey, Jeremy Jeffries, some other drivers that we didn't know getting a piece of this. Robbie Nisus back there as well in the 54. He was the one that got a piece of Josh Metallic. And the worst thing out of all that as well, we saw no connection problems at all from the start of the race to now out of that 77. It was just a without warning incident that took place. Nobody was prepared for a situation like that.
No, if you go back to the initial restart there, Seth, the 77 Garrett did blink across the line, but they were going in a straight line. They weren't going through the corners at all, so it was no harm, no foul. However, in the middle of that second corner, when that blinked and came back, the car essentially was not turning. So I don't think you could have predicted that to happen. If you're Donnie Garrett, it's just a random flash. Sometimes that happens, and you don't expect something like that to happen, where the car goes all the way across the track when that happens. So just really bad timing and a really bad spot on the racetrack.
Well, we saw last week Jessica Shelton getting involved in an incident, but she was able to battle that wounded race car back for a 15th position. We'll see if she's going to be able to do something like that. Here is this time, though, the damage, instead of being to the rear end of the race car, is actually to the front end, the more important area of the race car in terms of straightaway speed. And if these guys had a question of whether they could make it on fuel prior to that restart, I think now the pacing laps they're going to get under this caution, that's going to absolutely guarantee that these drivers can make it on what they've got in the tank.
Yeah, no more concerns about fuel at this point. If you've made it this far, having such a quick caution happen like that, they're going to be able to save quite a bit, whether it's running in fourth gear or just flat out clutching it all the way around the racetrack. So again, pit strategy, not so much of a factor. I would say the bigger story right now is we took out a lot of really, really fast race cars in that wreck. So that just lends an opportunity for some of these other guys to maybe come up here and capitalize off that.
And one of the keys to the race that we talked about in the closing stages is positioning yourself. Well, not only positioning yourself to win the race, but positioning yourself to not be involved in a wreck depending on where it takes place, because we've seen it all last season and we've seen it here, not only last week, but here as well in this second race. Wrecks taking place all the way throughout the field, whether it be up inside of the top 5 like we just had, just inside of the top 10, or in the mid-pack, even rear of the field. It seems like nowhere is safe here at Talladega. And we hear so many times drivers say, I want to run at the front, I want to run at the back, but you never know where Talladega is going to strike.
No, you absolutely you don't. You could assume that being up front would be the safe spot, but all it takes is one bad move, one bad bump, a bumper grab, and you can have the first 3 or 4 cars all facing the wrong way in front of the entirety of the field. So there is no safe spot. The safest thing that you can do is just try to maintain your momentum on the racetrack. Pay attention to what's going on around you at all times. And when something does happen, try to woe up your car in as safe a manner as possible and let those guys behind you know as well, hey, wowing up here because there's a mayhem breaking out in front of us. So we've seen it before where our leaders, I believe that's what took Joe DeSpirito out of the next to last race before the championship last season. He was running at the front of the pack and a huge wreck just took him out and ruined his day completely at the front of the field with the leaders. So yeah, there is no safe. Just try to be as smart as possible.
Bobby Farrell's going to get the lucky dog, get one of his 2 laps back here under this caution. And just want to expand on something you touched on, which is really important as well. And that is not only avoiding a wreck, but hoping that others around you are going to be smart enough to kind of figure out where you're going to be braking and where they're going to be braking, so that way there's no follow-up wrecks in trying to avoid where the initial caution starts. It kind of, you could liken it to coming down pit road with a group of race cars for green flag pit stops. Different drivers going to be moving left, different drivers going to be moving right, different braking zones. You've got to kind of not only accommodate where you are avoiding a wreck, but where other drivers are going to be as well.
Yeah, it's kind of funny to think about. Sometimes driving on the brakes is even harder than what it is to maintain speed and driving at speed, but it's absolutely true because everybody's used to driving at speed. But as we mentioned before, when you have that weight shift in the car, when you're slowing down, when you're abruptly turning, trying to avoid something, it doesn't take much to upset the balance of your race car, to spin your wheels just a little bit and completely turn your car sideways. So driving slow is almost as much of an art, as funny as it is to say, as it is driving at speed in a large pack. So you just got to do the best that you can. That's where practice comes into play. Trying these things out in practice, trying these things out in a happy hour, trying to get used to the guys around you. And that also speaks to the comfort level. A lot of times we'll see a lot of these drivers hook up with a lot of the same drivers from week to week to week. And a lot of that just has to do with comfort level. It doesn't mean that they don't want to race with their other competitors. They don't want to help their other competitors, but you kind of get a peace of mind. And with things that are, as hectic and as crazy as super speedway racing, a little bit of peace of mind can go a really long way.
Well, with that wreck, the landscape of our top 10 has changed significantly. Now, right up at the front, we've still got Despirito, Grant Wesley, and Bob Seminara, the top three. But now Bob Dixon moves up to fourth. Chuck McClure is in fifth. Bernie Mobbs in sixth. But look at our latter half of the top 10 here. Now we've got Tim Nofsker in seventh. Billy Elliser is now up there in eighth. Dante Ricky, first time we've really mentioned him here tonight. We know he started towards the rear of the field. This is classic Dante, starting at the back and being up at the front at the end. He's ninth, and Glenn Harris is currently up in the 10th position. If I'm looking at some of these drivers, the 26, the 84, the 08, these are drivers that did not have good finishes in the season opener. They need good performances tonight to counter that.
Absolutely. And that's kind of what we talked about at the very beginning of the broadcast here tonight, Seth. You want to make sure that you're not digging yourself into the hole, working your way to the playoffs. Assuming that you can pick up a win, sure, that locks you in. But if you can't, you have to make sure that you can try to be there in the top 10 in points just to try to put yourself into contention. So, these guys really looking to make up some points. As we mentioned, a big 30 some odd point swing from the front to the back of the pack with already having a few cars out. Those are a few positions guaranteed right there. So you want to try to continue capitalizing on that as the leaders now work their way into the tri-oval. Seth, it's going to be 12 laps to go when we go back green flag racing.
Indeed it is. Joe Despirito leading us down here for what we're hoping might be the final restart of the evening, but we're going to have to wait and see. Grant Wesley in second, and a little bit of a stack up there at the start. Seminara tried to time the bump perfectly, but he then dropped back to the bumper of Chuck McClure, and they didn't quite get that lined up the way they wanted to.
No, and Bob Dixon did not at all get a good start either. He has now fallen 4 or 5 car lengths back from the 88. Chuck McClure and the 28 of Tim Nofsker, they're now going to come up the track, fill that hole, heading to turn number 3. Wesley to the outside of Joe Despirito. It looks like those guys are going to have that middle line. Despirito and Seminara all alone on the bottom, heading through 3 and 4.
That did not work out the way Joe Despirito planned. He tried dropping down to help his teammate Bob Seminara, but at the same time, the outside line had other plans. Wesley, McClure, Nofsker, Bob Dixon, 4 against 2 up here at the front. Then he got a little bit of a breakaway there, back to Dante Ricky in the 7th spot, double wide behind him with Bernie Mobbs and Billy Elliser.
Yep, and Bob Dixon, he did move his way up into that middle line, as did the 24 of Joe Despirito. So right now, the leader's broken away. It looks to be a 10-car breakaway with Wayne Pribnow, the last car in that middle line before you get to Bernie Mobbs, who is about 7 or 8 car lengths back in the bottom line. Now, they're going to be 2 and 3 wide back there as they continue racing. There's going to be some fast cars coming up through that pack trying to contend with some damaged cars. A lot of really shaky moves being made out there right now, but so far all clean and green.
They are slicing and dicing, and I think a big reason why the mid-pack got wadded up, I believe there is an issue on that 90 of Bernie Mobbs. He appears to be off the pace, so tough break for him. I don't know what the situation is, but he dropped through the field like a rock.
Yeah, it looks like he's going a little too fast to have dropped 4th gear, if I had to guess, so not exactly sure what's happening there. Again, the first 11 or 12 cars now broken away, all running single file in the middle line before you get back to the number 4 car, Brian Schilling, who we haven't mentioned all night long. So right now, no side-by-sides happening out on the racetrack. Everybody pretty content to try to get back together, as there's now going to be 9 laps to go as they work their way around turns 3 and 4 and towards the tri-oval.
Kind of curious about that number 4 Busch Beer Ford Mustang, just based on the fact that when we had our second caution come out, Brian Schilling was about 6 car lengths away from being put a lap down. Now, I know he was involved back in the first wreck, so I thought he might be off the pace, but it looks like with Rodney Sullins pushing him, he may still be up to speed, might have just been lying in wait. And how about as well the 6 of Wiley Coat, because we saw him have some internet connection problems, drop to the back. He's now recovered, knocking on the door of the top 10.
Absolutely, and as far as I know, that car doesn't have any damage either. It's now Joe Despirito, Bob Seminara. They're going to work their way to that 3rd upper line, and now they're going to come back down and try to do that middle line share again, as your top 4 still Wesley, McClure, Tim Nofsker, and Bob Dixon. But right now, that upper middle line has 5 cars in comparison to that lower middle line's 4.
Yeah, Despirito and Seminara, they've got Dante, Ricky, Billy Elliser, and Glenn Harris up there with them. Now there's some cavalry coming on the inside line. That's Wayne Pribnow, the 00, Wiley Coat in the 6. So we're about to have 6 on the bottom and 5 on the top. We'll see if Despirito, though, with that preferred line, can still make it work. Novsker not giving him much room there in that middle groove.
Man, if I didn't know any better, I'd say those. Oh, we got
Caution.
a car almost upside down in the middle of the back straightaway. Didn't catch it. I believe it might have been the 038, if
Yes,
I'm
it
not
was.
mistaken. He is facing the wrong way now, working his way back onto the racing surface. Not sure what triggered that, Seth, but as the camera panned through toward the back of the pack, all I saw was the complete underside of that race car in the middle of the back straightaway.
Well, regardless of the fact he got airborne, it looks like somehow we may have gotten away with a single car incident here. Closing in towards the end of this race, and you are correct, there was contact between himself and it looks like the 2 of Hank Middleton, and that 038 of Dave Melson really been struggling here today. I believe he is now 3 for 4 in getting involved in wrecks here in this second race of the season.
Yep, and the car's all fanning out now in the middle of the back straightaway. There are 7 laps remaining, so we will have a minimum of a 2-lap shootout to conclude this race, but all that heavy, hard racing we saw up front as the 24 was trying to contest that middle line from Grant Wesley. We're going to rack them all back up again. I'm not sure who came across the line second. They were racing their way back to the line. Seth will have to take a look back at timing and scoring to see exactly how it was they came across as they raced their way back.
Like they're showing Chuck McClure in second place, Novsker in third. Looks like he was able to edge ahead of Joe Despirito coming to the start-finish line with Bob Seminara currently holding down the completion of the top 5. And, you know, we talked about positioning yourself at the end of the race. Now, we are going to get back green, but you have to wonder, with that outside line that was forming, Despirito, Seminara trying to make forward progress, it got Despirito from what I think was 6th at the time, now up to 4th place. Did those 2 spots he gained there under that green flag run, will those be the difference maker into him winning this race? It could very well be.
Well, I think it's going to be between that and depending on who he's got behind him working with him. We've seen the 712 of Bob Seminara. We know those 2 are teammates, so we know that they will work well together. We know the 84 of Dante Ricky has a history of working with those guys as well. I would say the X factor in that equation would be the 143 of Bob Dixon. I'm curious to see exactly what it is that he decides to do, as well as the 00 of Wayne Pribnow, the 26. Billy Elliser, these guys still having really, really strong runs. Those 2 positions under green flag may have counted for a lot at the time, but we're only going to have 2 laps to go, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see 3, maybe even 4 wide racing to the finish, Seth. I don't know. We'll have to see, can he make his way back up there, because we know that 88 and that 28, they're not going to give up that lead too easily, and I'm pretty sure we'll see those guys pretty nose to tail as they come across the start-finish line to take that green flag again.
One driver very happy to see this caution come out now with the fact we would be going back green. That is our lucky dog recipient, the 92 of Bobby Farrell. Remember, he lost 2 laps when he was upside down involved in the wreck that we had over in turn 1. He got one of those laps back under the previous caution. He'll get the second lap back here under this yellow flag. Plus, he's got the possibility with those 2 laps that we're going to have here in the closing stages. If another wreck occurs, who knows? He could pick up a couple more spots in the closing stages.
He could very well, so we'll have to see exactly how that plays out. This time by, I don't think they're going to get one to go this time by, but laps are ticking down. When they take across the finish line this time by, Seth, we're going to have 5 laps remaining. So the question is, how far back do you think that you can come from at this point, and how many cars do you think are at about that halfway point of the pack that have a little bit of damage but still have just enough in their tank to get themselves back up to toward the front of the pack?
Right now, if I'm looking at the drivers, where they're running currently, knowing the different adventures drivers have had here today, whether they've been involved in 1 wreck, 2 wrecks, or maybe even 4 wrecks, I'm saying that right now, I'm looking at maybe your top 11 as maybe the ones that could be up to speed with cars capable of making moves. Now, the tough thing is for some of those guys back there, like Billy Elliser, Wiley Coat, and Glenn Harris, because they are the tail end of this top 11, they're more than likely going to have to take on the role of pushing someone to victory lane rather than going to victory lane themselves, because being mired back there with so many cars ahead of them, it's going to be so difficult for them to find someone willing to push them to the front, since there's going to be such a limited number of laps.
Absolutely. And I'm actually now questioning, we may actually have 3 laps remaining when we go back to green, because we could potentially get the 1 to go next time by. But 2 or 3 laps, it's still not a whole lot of time, especially if you're stuck in that halfway point of the pack right at this time. I think you're most comfortable probably in that top 10. But again, I think there's a lot of unpredictables here. I think there's a lot of people that will be willing to help the 88, and there's a lot of people willing to help the 17, but what I'm not sure is those guys' willingness to help each other as they come to the closing laps. Now, we know there's a lot of respect among these competitors, but when it comes right down to it, you want to make sure you're in position and you can try to get one of those wins to work yourself into the playoffs. So if you're Chuck McClure or Grant Wesley, knowing how well you work together, do you continue to try to work together, or do you take the chance of racing each other too hard and leaving the door open for the likes of Tim Nosker, Joe DeSpirito, Bob Seminara, Bob Dixon, Dante Ricky, guys of the like?
Well, that's such a tough decision, I think, especially for Chuck McClure, because we've talked about it's been a long time since he's been to victory lane. He's up here with a chance of winning this thing, and yes, he has been working well with Grant Wesley, but he wants to make sure that his 17 is edged ahead when they come to the start-finish line. I think that this is definitely going to be where a lot of drivers are going to have their toughest task of the day in terms of positioning themselves for this win, because it looks like indeed we will get the 1 to green signal this next time around. So we will have 3 laps to go officially when we go back racing. And I think if you're any of these guys from second place on back, you're going to have to treat every single one of those 3 laps as if it's the white flag, because you don't know if a caution is going to come out, and it is race back to the start finish line. So, you know, the race could end on lap 64. And if you are still back there planning your move to get around Grant Wesley, it's going to be too little too late.
I absolutely agree with you. I think it's the time for planning has passed. If you don't have planned out in your head exactly what it is that you're going to try to do, it is too late. What was the keys to the race? What was point number 4 again, Seth?
Yeah, point number 4, have yourself positioned.
Have yourself positioned for that end of the race rush, and that's what everybody is looking at right now. If you guys thought it was crazy leading up till now, like I said, I wouldn't be surprised if we have 3, maybe even 4 wide racing to close this one out. We know we have enough fast cars up front to get it done, as we have 1 car sideways in the racetrack. The 60th Perry Bond has gotten together with another car toward the tail end of the line. Fortunately, it looks like no yellow is going to come of that. So those guys are going to have to catch back up to the field here. Grant Wesley, Chuck McClure again on your front row. Mark Paglia, Joe DeSpirito running 4th. Bob Seminara, Bob Dixon, Dante Ricky, Wayne Pribnow, Billy Ellis, or Wiley Cope will round out your top 10. A lot of really hungry guys out here. You know that they would love to find victory lane today.
Yeah, it looks like the drivers that were involved in whatever that little incident over in turns 1 and 2 were the 60 of Perry Bond, the 90 of Bernie Mobbs, and the 038 of Dave Melson. But to your point, glad that a caution did not come out, give us another extra lap of pacing. And one thing I want to point out here as well, we talked about it last week. A new rule that's been put in place here for the Super Speedway Series is that if you cause a wreck that ends this race under yellow, you start the following week basically with a strike. Any incident you cause next week, then you have to park your race car. Well, we saw a lot of near moments in the closing stages of last week's race where we thought it was going to end under caution, but they were able to keep it clean and green down to the checkered flag. We'll see if maybe that new ruling in place, if we're going to get these final 3 laps of racing under the green flag conditions.
Seth, do you remember exactly? I asked Josh Metallic in particular after his win last week about that rule. Do you remember what it was that he said about that?
He didn't remember. He didn't remember he even said it.
He said in the closing laps of the race, it didn't matter. Green flag is back out. We've got 3 laps to go. It looks like Grant Wesley with about a half car length advantage on the low side. Tim Nosker now tucked up right behind him. Chuck McClure now in that upper line. It looks like that 88 is going to slide up in front of the 17, leaving the door open for Nosker coming out of turn 2.
Tim Nosker trying to get up tight to that 88 to lead that inside line. Big push from behind. Dante Ricky shoving Bob Seminara, and turns Seminara into the back of the 28 Mustang of Tim Nofsker, trying to draw even into turn 3.
And this is the biggest run that we've seen, the most competitive run anyway, that we've seen this inside line be able to have. Nofsker is going to edge ahead out of 4. Man, it got real close. I thought Nofsker was going to be about sideways. They lost a lot of momentum on that low line. The 88 of Wesley, he's going to go back to the front by about a nose at the start-finish line, and cars behind them already starting to get 3 wide into turn 1.
We were 4 wide through the tri-oval for a brief moment as Wayne Pribnow got a little loose in the tri-oval area. Jeremy Jeffries went up the track there with Wiley Coate and Jeff Crivello, but up at the front, still half a car length advantage for Grant Wesley. Nofsker trying to get some help from that inside line. 1.5 to go. Wesley clear for the lead. Chuck McClure is going to be clear for second going into turn 3.
Joe DeSpirito on the back end of that 17 car. He's kind of stuck with nowhere to go except the outside line. Those first 2 cars kind of broken away. Nofsker's made his way to about the halfway point of the 17, but into the tri-oval, the 17 is going to clear again. Right now, Grant Wesley and Chuck McClure controlling this race, coming across the line for the white flag.
McClure was not clear all the way through that lap. Still had Nofsker to his left rear, but Wesley is clear. Can control both lanes here on this final lap. Nofsker trying to get to the left rear quarter panel, coming off of turn 2. Now it's those drivers in that second groove of McClure, DeSpirito, Dixon. Do they make a move and try a third lane?
Jeff Crivello, he's trying the extreme highline. Now down to the bottom. The 17 almost lost it as he tried to tuck down behind the 88 in front of the 28. It looked like Joe DeSpirito was trying to make a run, but no dice there. Right now on the bottom, Grant Wesley defending against the 17 and the 28. Oh, there's more contact!
And their leaders are wrecking. Who gets through the carnage? I think it's Nofsker.
Nofsker, but I'm not sure if Nofsker might have touched off that wreck. Mayhem. Only 2 cars across the finish line, Nofsker and Ellisor, before Ricky. Everybody else wadded up in the tri-oval. Cars upside down, sideways, on the track, in the grass, down off
We've
the
got
racing
about 7
surface.
cars in reverse trying to cross the start-finish line.
Ricky, my car might be on fire, Ricky Bobby, but I'm going to finish it out.
It is a melee. Jeremy Jeffries gets a push across the line from John Godfrey. Everyone's scrambling. It looked like Black Friday. Drivers trying to get into a retail store. Everyone's scrambling for the start-finish line to try and gain positions there with that wreck on the final lap in the tri-oval.
So unofficially, it is the 28 of Tim Nofsker in the Mark Paglia Motorcraft Ford number 28. We'll have to check with race officials and make sure that is going to be our race winner for the time being. What a story. Good to see that 28 car hopefully in victory lane. Tim Nofsker with just a great show. And remember what we were saying earlier, Seth. It didn't matter if you were running first. It didn't matter if you were running second. No place on the racetrack was safe.
Absolutely not. Let's see how this all generated going into turn 3. Now, McClure was able to get back down in front of Tim Nofsker. He tries the top side, then back down to the bottom. And I'm not necessarily certain that that was on the 28. It looked like McClure, when he turned down to the inside, he then came up and kind of grabbed off of the left front of the 28 of Nofsker with that momentum he lost. So I honestly think that's just one of your typical Talladega wrecks, but one of the toughest places on the racetrack to avoid a wreck there in the tri-oval, and I think that might have been our biggest wreck to date.
Absolutely. That was definitely a big one, and it looked like the 88 and 17, they were just trying to block for their lives. Actually, Seth, if you look at angle number 2, as they worked their way off of turn number 4, it looked like the 17 and the 88 may have gotten together, which forced the 17 down onto the apron, scrubbing just enough speed, as you mentioned, to come back across the nose of that 28 car. And just a lot going on there right now, and an absolutely massive crash. Everybody was trying to get through. Everybody's still at speed coming into that incident, trying to get to the checkered flag.
I think there were only 5 drivers that actually got through that wreck, and it's the 5 drivers that finished in the top 5. Nofsker, Ellisor, Dante, Ricky, who actually drifted through the tri-oval. Hank Middleton and Donnie Garrett.
Yep, I believe Middleton made it through unscathed. Judging by the right side of Garrett's car, I'm not so confident Garrett got through unscathed. But how about a big shout out to our second place finisher, Seth? Billy Elliser, through all the mayhem, maintained patience enough to finish right behind that 28 car and bring home that second place finish.
And we've got a couple of drivers as well that we know were involved in wrecks during the course of this race that are going to be completing out our top 10. You got Chris Elliott, who we know ended up getting into the wall not once but twice, once with the left side and once with the right side. Chris Emery, who we saw almost up into the air over in turn 1. He's going to get 7th. Jessica Shelton, who got involved in a wreck while running 3rd. She's currently scored 8th. Rodney Sullins in 9th. And Bobby Farrell, who got the lucky dog under the last caution. He's going to sneak out a top 10, but I am hearing, for the time being, the 28 of Tim Nofsker is scored your race winner. However, standings are unofficial, pending review.
And not too surprised to hear that, but what a finish. Hate to see it end with such a big wreck the way that it did, but that was that really aggressive 2-3 wide racing, and I don't think anybody was really at fault there. I mean, if you look at the position that the 88 of Grant Wesley was in, unfortunately, he ended up finishing 11th after leading off of turn number 4. There wasn't much that he could do. He had to kind of try to block those guys behind him. He was coming from the middle down to the bottom line, and I believe him and the 17 nearly touching. Whether they did or not, I'm not entirely sure, but I'm sure he probably tried to give that room back to the 17, which caused a lot of that. But you know, I would just like to mention one thing. You mentioned Jess Shelton with that 8th place finish. Now, we saw how much adversity she had to overcome this race after being involved in that wreck due to warp. This is exactly the sort of performances that she put together all throughout season number 51 to get herself to that final 4. So, you know, overcoming that adversity, working through it, and being there at the end of the race, Seth, just speaks for itself.
Yeah, she was one of a number of drivers that I saw crossing the start-finish line facing the wrong way, going backwards. She, Bobby Farrell, Grant Wesley, Josh Metallic, Dave Melson, Wade Prim. Now, they were all facing the wrong way, throwing it into reverse to get across the start-finish line as we're looking here at the finishing results. And, you know, obviously we're only able to judge on what we see up here. As stated, the finishing results are unofficial. Just going back and giving an opinion on what I saw on that replay there, looking at the 28, for me, when it comes to the last lap at a super speedway, I always look to see if the driver that maybe, you know, highlighted as the one that might have started that wreck, if they changed their line. And honestly, it didn't look like Tim Nofsker changed his line at all. He didn't go down. He didn't go up. To me, that just seemed like a whole racing deal. I think you hit the nail right on the head. The loss of momentum for Chuck McClure getting into the back of Grant Wesley was what stacked that whole thing up. And McClure being on the final lap, I mean, you know, he's got to try and force his way back up onto the racetrack somehow, trying to maintain that second position. And unfortunately, just the contact between the 17 and the 28 led to that big wreck in the trioval.
Yeah, and if my gut was going to tell me anything right now, Seth, I would bet after reviewing that incident, I wouldn't be surprised to see that called a racing incident, just because there was so much happening all at one time. Nobody really did anything wrong. It was just a lot of momentum changing, a lot of lane changing. I wouldn't even say anybody really drove over aggressively in that situation. It was just one of those things where a lot of guys were coming off with a lot of speed, trying to go into the trioval with a shot at that win. And, you know, push came to shove, and that's what started all of it. But again, big shout out, like you mentioned, Seth, to a lot of these guys with really strong top 10 finishes tonight. Hank Middleton, Donnie Garrett, Chris Elliott, Chris Emery, again, Jess Shelton, Rodney Sullins, Bobby Farrell. These guys worked really hard all night long and got themselves there at the end of the race. And, you know, even if it's a battle of attrition, as long as you're there at the end, that's what counts.
Yeah, a couple of drivers really going to benefit here tonight with their performances. Billy Elliser was 18th in points. Donnie Garrett was also tied with him for 18th in points. Chris Emery was 23rd and Rodney Sullins in 24th. We talked about at the beginning of the year, if you end up having a bad run, if you're able to get a good run following that up, you're going to gain a lot of spots in the standings. So I think that all four of those drivers, we're going to be seeing them make some leaps and bounds when we see the standings for next week in race number 3. Let's get some words with some of our top performers here today. And I think for some of them, we're going to have to ask how that wreck either looked in their windshield or in their rearview mirror. Let's kick things off with our third place finisher, Dante Ricky. Hey, Dante, it's Zach and Seth up here in the Flatout Racing Network studios. You got us?
Gotcha.
Well, man, we saw on that final wreck through the tri-oval, you literally drifted it on that outside line to bring it home in the third position. But we already documented about the fact that you weren't able to participate in last week's race, subsequently came in 37th in points. How important was it for you here in the first race of the season that you were able to start to come away with a finish to kind of counter that poor performance last week?
Yeah, this was a big night for me, Seth. Just to be able to get out there and get a few laps and run an elite pack. At the beginning of the race, I didn't think it was going to be. It was really hard for me to get in the draft and find people to work with, and I was able to avoid most of the wrecks. I had a little bit of damage on the front bumper of the car from something that happened under caution, but I'll tell you what, it was extremely important for me to come out here, Seth, and do the absolute best I could. And, I was able to work with Bob Seminara and Joe there near the end of the race with about 10 laps to go. We were able to find each other and work together. I really feel bad for how it ended up for Bob, though. He just barely got involved in the wreck. I tapped him in the back bumper a little bit, and I'm real sorry I couldn't stay off him. I hate to see that happen, but I'll tell you what, I was able to dodge a big bullet there by missing that, coming home with a third place finish. And that last lap was absolutely crazy. I really didn't know what to expect once the car started to spin out of control. I just kind of tapped the brake, turned the wheel to the right a little bit, and made sure I got the car as straight as I could back to the start finish line. And man, I hate to see races end with crashes like that. It's not the way that we want to have it done. But, third place finish was extremely important for me this week.
Hey, Dante, it's Zach. Congratulations on your really strong third place run. As you mentioned, a lot of adversity you had to overcome there coming from the back of the pack, getting through a lot of incidents out there on the racetrack happening all around you all throughout the race. So the cherry on top just kind of being able to make it through that last wreck there. Now, as Seth and I kind of talked about, that it seemed like one of those incidents where everybody was going for a lot of real estate, not really anybody doing a whole lot wrong, but just good hard racing at the end of the race, which we saw a lot of throughout the race. We know that you had that issue last week where you weren't able to make it in under the green flag. So bringing it back, getting that third place finish, how important is that for momentum carrying forward, because now you're going to find yourself, you could have very conceivably found yourself, in the bottom 30 in points had you had another bad night here tonight. But instead of that, this gives you a pretty good outlook heading toward the remainder of the season. Yeah.
Absolutely, Zach. This is a huge energy booster for me and our race team. And, the Outlaw Racing Group is getting a lot better on these super speedways and improving in our results is a big goal of this season, number 52. And we really do want to be a big threat for the championship here in this 84 team. And also with my teammate, Sonny Tallman, this season, we are really excited about what we can do and what's still to come later on in the year and season. Absolutely.
All right, good to hear, Dante. You mentioned your teammate Sonny Tallman trying to get you guys up there. We've seen him running quite a bit better as well. He's one of the newer guys out here at RTG. So when you guys talk and you work together, are you actively trying to find each other out there on the racetrack, or is it one of those things where it's, hey, Sonny, let me try to help coach you through this, kind of take more of a mentor role to you and explain exactly how this might play out, as you found yourself quite a bit of success in the series in the past?
Absolutely. Sonny and I are in close contact and communication throughout the race, and using the whispers carefully, of course. There are times that we try to make moves and we try to plan out the next move for Sonny and get him in a position where I think he can move up to the front and I can catch him or onto him easily. It doesn't always work out, but with experience, comes intuition. And Sonny and I have both been around for a long time, over 10 years, in fact, at different race leagues. And Sonny's an amazing teammate to have, and I really give him a lot of credit for helping me out and getting to where I am.
Right on, Dante. Again, congratulations on a really strong third place run as you work your way out of race number 2 in much better shape than a lot of the competitors out there on the racetrack. So what do you got for us as far as sponsors, shout outs, and thank yous?
Oh, yeah. Big shout out here to Mark Paglia and family. Mark, we're thinking about you and praying for you and your family tonight. I know you'll be watching, and, hopefully we'll get you back in here soon. Big thank you to all of my family and friends, my brother and my parents, and also especially to all of the RTG drivers, owners, admins, too numerous to count and name. Without all of you, we couldn't do it. It's all for you drivers. Thank you so much, guys.
Well, Dante Ricky gets his first top 5 of the season. Third place run here tonight at Talladega. Congratulations, Dante. We look forward to seeing how many spots this gains you in the points. And of course, as Zach alluded to, hopefully this is the start of some good momentum for you as you try and find victory lane for the first time here in season 52.
Thanks, guys. Good job.
And now let's get our second place finisher, Billy Elliser, who was a playoff contender, pointed his way into the playoffs last season, but he finished in the top 5 3 times. Only finished as high as 5th tonight. He is a runner-up finisher here in the Tally Challenge in race number 2. Hey, Billy, it's Zach and Seth up here in the Flatout Racing Network studios. You got us?
Yeah, Zach, how's it going, bud?
Well, man, what a job you did there in the closing stages of this race, not only to be there second place to get through that wreck, but also to position yourself there as well. We saw you run into a little bit of early issues, getting involved in one of those big wrecks, but able to fight back from that adversity, work your way back up through the field, and have a shot at winning this thing. I mean, if that wreck had not taken place, where did you see yourself finishing? And after that wreck took place, did you think you had a shot at Nofsker at the line?
I was kind of figuring on maybe 10 behind Dante, and then that wreck happened, and I just got lucky and got second.
You know, a lot of times we talk about up here how you guys are constantly out there having to kind of plan your moves a couple laps ahead. How do you plan for a wreck to take place off of turn 4 to position yourself for that, or does a lot of it add up to just right place, right time?
Right place, right time.
Hey, Billy, it's Zach up here in the booth. Again, congratulations on a really, really strong second place showing here tonight. Now, I got to ask you, is that as all of that was breaking loose in front of you, what's going through your mind? How hectic does it get in the cockpit of that race car, knowing that absolutely every one of those cars around you is going in every which direction, and you just got to try to, by the grace of God, try to find your best way through that wreck?
Hey, I just kept it to the floor. I hope I made it. That's all you can do.
All right, Billy, and you did a really damn good job of it. We saw you overcome quite a bit of adversity last season, especially in the second half of last season, able to make your way into the playoffs. How much confidence does this give you heading out of race number 2 into race number 3, knowing that you had a playoff contention year last season, and already you've put forth quite a bit of momentum here as you work into race number 3?
Just more practice, man. I love these races.
All right on, man. Again, congratulations on that second place. Thank you. Shout out sponsors. What do you got for us?
I want to thank you guys for calling this race and everybody that showed up. Great race.
Well, that's Billy Elliser. He's going to start out the season with a podium finish in the second race of the year. Second place here tonight at Talladega Superspeedway. Congratulations there, Billy. We look forward to seeing if you can keep this momentum up as you look to go back-to-back and making it into the Tally Challenge playoffs.
There you go. I'm going to try to. Thank you guys a lot.
And down to victory lane we go. Let's get a word with tonight's designated driver of the number 28 machine, Tim Nofsker.
Hey, Billy.
Hey, Tim, it's Zach and Seth up here in the Flatout Racing Network studios. You got us?
Sure do, guys.
Well, man, so cool to be able to see that number 28 go to victory lane. We know that the Mark Paglia machine has had 2 different drivers behind the wheel of it in these past 2 weeks in tribute for him, and so cool to see it go to victory lane. We know that you were a 2-time winner last season as well, so let's talk about the driver. I mean, this win more than likely going to lock you into the playoffs, something you missed last season just because you weren't high enough in the point standings. So now knowing you got a playoff spot potentially locked up, what's the outlook for the remainder of the regular season?
Well, just show up every Thursday and run my race. I had such a struggle tonight. Got a little bit of damage in that first incident, and it didn't lose too much, but maybe just a little. But it was a bad pusher.
Well, we saw a lot of pandemonium off turn 3 and then off of turn 4, triggering that final wreck that took about just everybody out of the running. but you were able to clear it. What was the outlook? What was the viewpoint there from the cockpit of that number 28 coming off the final corner?
Yep, I was locked on to Chuck there. I was pushing him through. It looked like he tried to make a move underneath the 88. I think the 88 might have tried to block maybe a little or something there, and somehow Chuck ended up down below the yellow line, and that's when I tried to bail on it and go up, but he just didn't have enough room to get back up on the racing surface, so it just looked like a bad racing deal to me. But I hated like hell to end the race like that. We worked our way methodically up front, and I was just trying to get a podium finish for Mark, and just let him know how much he means to all of us. It's like one big family over here. So when one of us goes through something, we're all going through it.
Hey, Tim, it's Zach. It's good to see you, man. Good to talk to you. Congratulations on getting the win in that number 28. Now, I want to give you just a little bit of a moment here as I shift the focus away from you and Victory Lane. I promise I'll bring it back in just a moment. But as you spoke to the quality of the community over here at Rolling Thunder Gaming, that's something that I think we've all talked about quite a bit. And it's something that, it's hard to explain to anybody that's outside of the RTG community, the level of respect and love that each one of everybody has for each other out here. It's really just astounding. It kind of speaks, that we do a lot of donation, a lot of charity races, a lot of memorial races for these guys. But could you give us just a little bit more on that?
Yeah, sure. We all take this game seriously, and it's a hobby / outlet for all of us. But when real life throws you a curveball, it puts everything in perspective as to, we're here just to live in another world. But in the real world, bad things do happen, and, anything we can do to support each other through those things. It's even as something as small as me just driving Mark's car to show him that, hey, you're not forgotten. We're thinking of you. And, and we may be tough competitors on Thursday, but when it comes right down to it, we're all good friends.
Exactly. Well said, Tim. Very happy to hear that. Always good to talk to you again, as always, to get you in victory lane for your win number 1 of the season. We saw last year you won a couple races, but weren't quite able to get it done with the number of races that you were started. How much confidence does this give you working toward hopefully a championship run at the end of the playoffs here?
Well, that's the end goal, to get to the playoffs and do well. You still have eight races left to tough it out and keep driving toward that goal. No pun intended. But there's just so many good drivers here. Anybody can win on any given Thursday. It just depends if you're in the right place at the right time. So you can't be lackadaisical when it comes to thinking you've got it. You have to keep pushing every Thursday, trying to get the best finish you can.
Right on, Tim. Again, congratulations on your victory in week number 2 here tonight. Shout outs, thank you. Sponsors, what have you got for us?
Well, obviously, the biggest shout out goes to Mark and his wife. It sounds like things are going better for them. So we just can't wait till we see him back on the track. And then personal shout out I'd like to give to my daughter. She texts me during the caution periods, and she stays pretty intense. So I appreciate her watching. And of course, shout out to RTG and especially Josh and Wiley. They do such a good job on Thursday night. It's like trying to be the head of a controlled chaos. So they do such a good job, and and thanks to you guys for putting on the show.
Well, Tim Nofsker wins a thriller here tonight in the second race of the season, picking up his first win of season 52 and potentially going to be locking himself up a spot in the playoffs for the first time in 2 seasons. Congratulations there, Tim, on a well-deserved win. Again, super cool to be able to see you win in that number 28 machine, and we look forward to seeing what you're able to do here for the remainder of this regular season in the attempt to try and pick up some more bonus points.
Yeah, I appreciate it, guys. Thank you.
And so as Tim Nofsker continues to celebrate in victory lane, it was interesting when we were talking with him, Zach, because I was kind of going over some numbers in my head, and I find it really ironic. I know that it's a different situation with the drivers, but the number 39 and the number 28 go to victory lane the first 2 races of the season. They were the first 2 numbers eliminated from the playoffs last season in that first round. It's so strange how a series like this, you cannot base one season against another.
Absolutely not. And that just kind of speaks to, as we always harp on in these broadcasts, the unpredictability factor of this super speedway series. There's always so much that can happen. Anything can break loose at any given time, and you just never quite know. Again, like we talked about so long last season, Josh Metallic is one of those drivers that, we expect to see in victory lane, and we never once saw it, which ended up inevitably being his downfall as he fell out of the playoffs. But, Mark Paglia as well. We know once he gets himself back out on the racetrack, he's going to be as fierce as ever. And Tim Nofsker. Now, I don't think we're going to run into a situation where we see a race winner that doesn't make the playoffs. So I think it's a pretty safe bet right now that Metallic and Nofsker, those guys are locked in. They're going to be competing for a championship. So the question is, do we get a repeat winner, or will we find ourselves in a situation where we will have multiple single race winners, making that field just a little bit bigger as we work our way toward the playoffs?
It's interesting you bring up repeat winners because we had 5 repeat winners last season. 4 of them made the playoffs. The only one that didn't was Tim Nofsker. So now we know Josh Metallic is locked in. We've got future drivers that are going to get locked in at some point here in these next 8 races. Do they have to be worried about Tim Nofsker now being in the playoff grid?
Absolutely. I think if you're any one of these competitors right now, how strong the 39 and the 088 are at these super speedways, especially if they get an opportunity to run together. They're very, very fast. So I think already those 2 drivers have likely turned some heads, and you've got some other drivers going, oh boy, the playoff field is looking pretty hot and heavy for season 52. So I better get up there and try to get one of those victories to guarantee myself in.
All right, one final question for you here, Zach. We talked about the mentality of drivers coming here into the second race after what had happened to them, whether it be good or bad, in the season opener. Now the second race is under their belt. Some drivers were able to kind of counter their poor performances from race 1. Some of them still find themselves in the slump. So what kind of a mentality do we see these drivers going into race 3?
I think the confident drivers are going to come in confident. However, you want to try to do your best to manage expectations, temper yourself, and remind yourself that it is a super speedway. So don't come in with too big a chip on your shoulder, because that could quickly be turned upside down at any point. Conversely, if you're one of those drivers that has found yourself in a 2-week slump now, I think you're really starting to think about, hey, I might have to go out there and get one of these victories, because if I can't finish these races, I'm going to be in big trouble, probably in the bottom half of this point standings, especially if we continue to have 35 plus car field, Seth. You just can't have too many bad races with that many cars starting on any given week. So I think if you're at the front, you want to try to stay at the front. If you're at the back in the points, you need to start finishing those races and being there at the end.
Well, the season is still young. Only 2 of the playoff spots currently are occupied. 8 races still remain, and we continue on the season next week with race number 3 of season 52. Another crazy one here tonight. It was kind of wait till the smoke settles and see who gets to the start-finish line, as only a handful of survivors actually made it through that last lap final wreck, but it was Tim Nofsker through the smoke, emerging as the race winner here tonight. Zach, another wild one at Talladega. It never never disappoints. Appreciate you joining me in the booth for this one.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Seth, FRN, everybody, owners, drivers, admins at RTG, and of course, you, the race fans watching at home. Race number 2 is in the books. We will head off to race number 3 next week. We got that exciting finish that I think we thought we were probably going to get tonight. So, Seth, from here, who knows? It's
Absolutely.
anybody's game.
It's anybody's guess, and we are certainly looking forward to it. Hope you are as well. Green flag for race number 3 will fly next week at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Thursday evening. But for Zach Fremont, I'm Seth Cole. Enjoy the rest of your night as you've been watching another broadcast courtesy of the Flatout Racing Network.